May 2011, the world's most wanted man, Osama bin Laden, was killed in a highly classified operation. But here we are, well over a decade later, and the world has never seen a single verified photograph of the deceased target. I mean, think about that for a second. The mastermind behind the most devastating terror attacks in history is taken down, and the ultimate proof of his death remains completely hidden from the public eye. Now, you might be wondering, the question isn't just why the United States didn't show it. The real question we're diving into today is what exactly would have broken if they had. You see, the decision to keep this photograph under lock and key, that was not just some routine bureaucratic red tape. Not at all. It was an incredibly calculated move driven by a very specific, very real fear. Releasing an image of his bullet-wounded face wouldn't just be breaking news. The intelligence community feared it could instantly spark violent outrage, riots, and attacks in cities worldwide. It would be like throwing a match into a powder keg. But to really understand why his image, and honestly his physical body, posed such an immense threat even after his death, we have to look back at how he became such a monumental figure in the first place.
And his origins are an absolute paradox. Bin Laden's story doesn't start in some remote cave. Actually, he was the 17th child out of 54 in a billionaire Saudi Arabian family. We're talking about a family so incredibly wealthy and influential that they literally once paid the salaries of government officials when the Saudi treasury was running low. But things shifted during his time at Jeddah University, where he connected with members of the Muslim Brotherhood. By 1984, he had moved to Peshawar, setting up a base to fund and train volunteers fighting in Afghanistan. That was the direct groundwork for Al-Qaeda. Eventually, his extremist views led him to issue a fatwa, formally declaring a holy war against Western influence. So he goes from an ultra-wealthy student to a radicalized militant leader in a shockingly short amount of time.
So here's the crucial point to understand. By the time of his death, bin Laden was essentially a man without a country. His extreme actions and fatwas made him an absolute pariah in his homeland. Saudi Arabia completely banned him, they revoked his citizenship, and they flat out refused to take his body when he died. And what about Pakistan, right? The country where he was ultimately found hiding? Well, the presence of an unknown secret support network for bin Laden right inside Pakistan made the country completely untrustworthy in the eyes of the United States. In fact, some top Pakistani leaders had historically even referred to him as a hero. So handing the body over to either of these nations, yeah, that was simply out of the question.
Now, amidst all this intense geopolitical tension, the actual raid on his compound produced a rather astonishing, almost unbelievable logistical oversight. When the Navy SEALs finally took down their target, they obviously needed to verify his identity right there on the spot. They knew bin Laden was notably tall, around 6'4". But get this, no one had brought a measuring tape. Literally no way to measure him. So they had to improvise by laying a 6'2" soldier down right next to the body just to confirm the height difference. When the mission commander relayed this back to the White House, President Barack Obama broke the immense tension in the room by asking how they could afford a $65 million stealth helicopter but not a $10 measuring tape. It's just a wildly surprising moment of humanity and humor in the middle of an otherwise incredibly intense military operation.
Once his identity was confirmed, though, the clock was relentlessly ticking. The US military had to figure out what to do with arguably the most controversial remains on the planet, and they decided to meticulously adhere to Islamic burial rites. Those rites dictate that a burial should occur within 24 hours. So within just 12 hours of the raid, his body was rushed from Afghanistan directly to the deck of the USS Carl Vinson in the Arabian Sea. They followed strict maritime protocol to the letter, washing the body, wrapping it in a traditional white cloth, having a military officer read the last prayers which were translated into Arabic, and finally releasing the weighted body into the northern Arabian Sea.
Now, you might be asking yourself at this point, why go through all that trouble, right? Why not just destroy the remains completely, perhaps through cremation, just to be absolutely sure there was nothing left? Well, the answer lies strictly in Islamic tradition. In Islam, cremation is considered deeply disrespectful and is strictly forbidden. The rules are so uncompromising that it's prohibited not just to burn a body, but you can't even watch someone else's body burn. So the US military, despite taking out a notorious terrorist, made a highly calculated decision to respect the broader religious traditions to avoid unnecessarily antagonizing the entire Islamic world. They needed a solution that respected the religion but left absolutely no physical trace of the man. And this brings us to a fascinating historical comparison. Why the sea? Why not just bury him somewhere on land? Well, the US government had learned a very, very hard lesson just a few years prior with the execution of Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. After Saddam was hanged, his body was returned to his birthplace of Tikrit. And what happened next?
was exactly what the US wanted to avoid. Despite curfews, thousands took to the streets, and Saddam's grave effectively became a pilgrimage center. It became a physical shrine for extremists to celebrate his legacy and call for revenge. By burying bin Laden at the bottom of the ocean, the US ensured that there would be zero geographic coordinates for his followers to rally around. No shrine, no monument, no physical symbol of his terror whatsoever.
And you know, this exact same logic is why the photograph was suppressed. President Obama summarized the decision perfectly. He stated that releasing the photos would create a national security risk and that there was simply no need to spike the football. If an image of a deceased, wounded bin Laden hit the internet, it wouldn't be viewed as just simple proof of death by his followers. It would be weaponized. It would become the ultimate extremist propaganda, a really powerful visual call to action. Extremism scales faster through imagery than it does just through ideas. Every single frame of that photo would create a new narrative, and every new narrative would recruit a new radical, essentially planting the seeds for future attacks against the United States.
Okay, now, while the body and the photos were hidden away forever, the CIA did seize his personal computers from the compound. And what they found? It completely shatters the myth of the pious holy warrior. In his public letters, bin Laden viciously condemned American society for its immorality, its debauchery, and its treatment of women. But his private hard drive? It painted a drastically different picture. The mastermind of 9/11 was actually sitting in his compound consuming books on 9/11 conspiracy theories, like literally reading ideas that the Illuminati runs the world. And even more contradictory, the CIA discovered a fairly extensive collection of pornography. The gap between his puritanical public preaching and his private reality exposes just a profound, bizarre level of hypocrisy.
But you know, his hard drives didn't just contain hypocrisy. They contained the chilling bureaucracy of terror. Among the files was an actual, literal Al-Qaeda job application form. I mean, it is deeply unsettling to read. It asks standard HR questions like, have you ever been convicted by a court? And have you ever been to jail? But then it takes this incredibly dark, horrific turn. It starts asking what objective the applicant wants to achieve on their jihad path. And finally, the most chilling question of all. Who should we contact when you become a martyr? It just shows how he had systematized radicalization into a cold, calculating machine. He was treating suicide missions with the same exact banality as filling out emergency contact forms at a corporate desk job.
And I think this ultimately reveals the true tragedy of extremism. It isn't just the physical destruction it causes, it's the absolute psychological destruction of the individual. Every extremist starts as a normal human being, but the radicalization process methodically strips away their humanity. It happens the exact moment a person stops asking questions, closes their mind, and allows blind faith and deep-seated hate to replace rational thought and empathy. They become totally convinced that only they are right and everyone else in the world is wrong. So, I want to leave you with this to think about. If the world's most infamous extremist built his entire empire by weaponizing closed minds, isn't our absolute greatest defense simply the courage to keep asking questions?